Okay.
Now we're going to do, so first your name, your title, and a little bit about your company.
Okay. My name is Rick Lang, the owner, president.
Right, so
Sorry.
CEO.
CEO,
right,
sorry.
Because we're telling people in
Yep.
C-suite.
Yep.
And look directly in here the whole time.
Okay, right.
It's about eye contact, you're in control.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm Rick Lang, Single Source Telecom, CEO. We've been based in Denver for the last 12 years. We focus on providing cloud-based solutions to the call center industry.
Watch too much of this, it just looks
Okay.
like you're really fucking uncomfortable and
Okay.
you're nervous about shit.
All right.
All right, so let's do that again.
All right.
In the front. Remember, man, you're fucking Rick Lang. Let's go.
All right. All right.
Right, take two.
All right. I'm Rick Lang with Single Source. We're a Colorado-based company that focuses on providing hosted services to the call center industry.
Great. Rick, we're going to talk first about about technology, right? In 3 minutes or less, let's talk about the evolution of technology in the contact center, right? Where it started and where we are today. Okay?
And
Okay. At the beginning of the contact center, the only technology you had was a phone.
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. And then this came to the best of your recollection. You don't have to be an expert on it because I'm going to cut your answers in with everybody else's, and it's going to all kind of go.
Are you doing like an educational series to teach people about the industry?
Well, I wanted to say about we have all our perspectives. So let's just remind
All right.
everybody about how we got here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So let's talk about the
Technology.
evolution of technology in the contact center industry. Where did we start?
All right. I think that we're at a really good place right now with the evolution and how technology has changed and advanced over the last 10 years in the contact center space. You know, it started with a very, everything was premise-based. The contact centers were hesitant to move to the cloud. They were hesitant to use VoIP services. They wanted everything on-prem. Everything had to be in-house so that they could control it. And I think that over the last 10 years, the contact centers have really begun to trust the cloud, the technology that the carriers are putting out there, and really the stability, the security, and everything that the carriers are promising. Now it's not a question of if you're in the cloud or not. It's really what technology are you using in the cloud, and the technology is what's differentiating the call centers. The platforms are challenging each other, and every year someone is making new advancements. They're taking new strides and really pushing the envelope as to what is cutting edge and what is making moves in the contact center space.
All right, let's talk about the revolution of technology. As we look forward, what are going to be the big revolutionary things that you see in the future?
Okay. When we talk about the future of the contact center space,
Let's talk. Use the phrase "the revolution of," right? That
Okay.
revolution is a key word. Evolution and revolution are key words to differentiate.
So
what we're
revolution.
talking about. Yeah.
with regards to the revolution of the contact center space, it's really about connecting with the end user, connecting with the consumer, and how do we bridge this gap between the agents and the consumer or the individual that they're trying to reach. Personally, I feel that the phone and making phone calls, and it's dead, right? Nobody answers their phone anymore. It's getting harder and harder to utilize that media to connect with the consumer. So when you're talking about the revolution of the contact center, it's really how can we look at different media's omni-channel solutions, and how can we use intelligent data to connect and to increase our contact ratios, to find different ways to connect with the consumer and do it in ways that they want to be communicated with. Consumers are not picking up the phone and making calls to call centers. They're not talking to agents. They're going online. They want to use chat. They want to use SMS. And so it's these different medias that are defining the next generation of the call center and how we communicate with each other.
Now, what do you think is going to take to get there from where we are today?
I think that competition is what drives technology, what drives people to be better. I think just competition is what drives innovation. when companies come out, when providers come out with platforms that challenge everyone else, that say, I'm better than so-and-so, when you can differentiate your company compared to others and you're not simply a me too, that's what's going to push the envelope. That's what's going to make the other players in the industry take notice of what they're doing and ask themselves, hey, are we getting stale? Are we missing the mark? Are we really that cutting edge? As we've said before, the contact center industry is rapidly changing. We need to develop new ways to communicate and connect with the consumer. And that innovation is what's going to drive the revolution and the change.
Nice. You do it really well. Yeah. Right, now we're going to start talking about regulations. Keep your feet back.
Regulations.
Yeah, right. So now your regulations, let's talk about the evolution of regulations in the contact center space, right? Where did they start? Try and dance through the milestones to where we are today.
Okay. With regards to regulation and the effects on the contact center industry, I feel like it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, those regulations like the TCPA guidelines, they drive new technology. They force the service providers, they force us to be better and to think differently about how we communicate. But at the same time, they do inhibit, and there's certain aspects of it where the guidelines allows for certain companies to take advantage of the regulations and to profit from it. I don't believe that anybody should be profiting from regulations. If we're truly trying to protect the consumer, then let's protect them, but they shouldn't be profiting from it. That's where I have a little bit of a problem with regulation, but at the same time, that same regulation is what drives new products. It's what helps certain companies kind of jump to the forefront of the industry and prove that, hey, we're innovative, we're making changes, and really showcase them as a star when they can provide a solution to a particular regulatory need.
Right, now let's talk about the revolution of regulations, right? What's going to come in the future? What do you see coming? What has to come?
The revolution of regulation?
The revolution of regulations.
The revolution of regulation. It's a tough one to say, and it's a tough question to answer. But the answer is this: as regulation progresses forward, and as regulation progresses forward, it's obviously going to define new technologies. But as we define new ways to communicate, whether it's SMS, whether it's email, whether it's chat, the FCC and the regulatory boards are going to be one step behind us. It's essentially a cat and mouse game. As soon as they create a law or a regulation or try and inhibit us from doing what we do, what's beautiful about the contact center industry is that we're always advancing, we're always moving forward, and we're always finding a way to be one step ahead of the regulations. And that, to me, it's a beautiful relationship, it's a beautiful marriage, if you will, because as we develop new technologies, they develop new ways to prevent us from doing what we do.
Great. Now, what's it going to take for us to get there, to that new regulatory space, from where we are today? You're writing me.
In order to get to that new plateau or the new era of this balance between regulation and technology, it's going to take people being innovative. It's going to take companies deciding that they don't care about the risk involved. They're going to push the envelope. The TCPA was a very daunting and defining moment in the call center industry, but there were companies that looked at it and said, we're not gonna let them bully us around. We're not gonna stand for that. And not only did they develop technology to adhere to the compliance of it, but they actually had the gall and the courage to stand up in court and say, hey, we're not going to do this. We can lobby with the FCC and go to Washington and do certain things along those lines, but at the end of the day, somebody has to be the one that says, you know what, you're not gonna do this to me. I'm gonna see you in court. And really, I feel like that's what pushes the envelope. That's what kind of sets the bar, because unless we push back and say we're not going to do this, you're not allowed to push us around, it'll continue to happen. It sets a bar that the regulation determines how we operate. And quite frankly, I think that innovation and technology, and that's what determines how we operate as an innovation. What is successful? What increases contact ratios? What helps the call center grow and be profitable? That's what should determine, the industry, not regulation.
Solid. Right, now we're going to jump over to the consumers.
Okay.
Right, we're going to talk about the evolution of the consumer and the consumer's behavior.
Okay.
Right, let's talk about however you want to take it, right? But I want to talk about how it used to be up until how it is today.
Okay.
Okay.
In my opinion, the consumers are very, back in the day, used to be very uneducated. And
Let's start over. Back in the day, the consumer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Back in the day, the consumer, quite frankly, was very uneducated, and they were very trusting, which, as they should be. But over the years, everybody has received a telemarketing call. Everybody has received a phone call, and what's interesting is how with cell phones, how they've been identifying call centers as when on the caller ID is, hey, this is a call center, this is fraud. The consumers over the years have really developed a true hatred for telemarketing, and it's a shame. But at the same time, it's also it forces our industry to change how we communicate with them. I read something from Avaya a few years ago, where Avaya said that millennials and people under 40 don't call into 1-800 numbers. They don't call for customer service. They don't use the phone. They're going to go to the online. They're going to reach out via chat. They're going to do everything possible not to have to pick up the phone. And that was a very interesting stat, and I think that was about 5 or 6 years ago. And within that time frame, you've really seen the development of omnichannel. You've really seen the industry say, how else can we communicate? Millennials don't want to talk to anybody, quite frankly. So how do you communicate with them? You have to look at the consumer and ask yourself, how are they communicating, and how can we interact with them? And it's not calling them, especially with the decline in landlines. Nobody has a landline anymore.
Okay. So let's talk about the revolution of that consumer behavior, right? As we continue to look forward, go 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, right? How do you see that consumer behavior changing in the future?
The consumer behavior in the future is going to mimic what it's done in the past. Right now, the consumer will not answer the phone. Right now, the consumer looks at their caller ID, they don't recognize the number, they're not answering the phone. They're not, they're deleting messages on answering machines if they even get them. That behavior is going to continue to progress, and that's going to be the behavior of the consumer in the future. They're going to stop responding to SMS messages. They're going to stop responding to emails. In fact, I don't think anybody responds very well to emails today, but they're going to stop responding to the medias that we're developing today. And it's a very valid point to consider, because as a call center owner, or you have to take notice of the fact that the way that we're communicating right now is only the way that we're going to communicate for a set amount of time. We're not going to be communicating in this fashion 5 to 7 years from now. That is really where intelligent data and artificial intelligence, and that's really where that comes into play. We have to be able to collect as much data on the consumer or on our target audience, be able to connect with them in some fashion, establish credibility, and establish the credibility early in our communication with them, so that they will interact with us, that they'll trust that the message that we're trying to send, that they'll take the time to interact with us, whatever that way is. If that's chat, if that's video, whatever the next big media breakthrough is.
Right. So last question is going to be then, how do we get to that future space, right? That revolutionary space where you see it in the future, right? Because something's got to give. Something's got to give. Right?
Yeah. Getting to that that point in the future where we're utilizing new technology, I'm going to go back to that, to the marriage and the relationship of regulation and technology. That regulation, and as we develop the SMS, the chat, the omni-channel, and we combine that with intelligent data, and we get smarter and more accurate, if you will, on how we communicate with the consumer. As we push that envelope, the regulation will be right there. And as they continue to regulate, that's what's going to force someone in the industry to say, what's next? And it really comes down to saying, how are people communicating today? And that's the real question you constantly have to ask yourself is how is the next generation buying services, handling customer service issues? How are they doing and what's the preferred method? And then you develop a solution around that. And then when that becomes stale and outdated, you have to be on the front end of whatever the next media is.
That's it, man. You killed it.
Yeah.
You did it real nice. Yeah, hold on. I'll get that mic for you. Just give me a second.